So guys, I want to do another tough video, and honestly, this may be probably one of the most important videos that I do. And also with my video series, I gotta think about, what's the message of these videos, or what do I actually want to do, or what do I actually really want to accomplish with this? And I really think that with this video in particular, my message is that ultimately, there's nothing wrong with being any race or any gender, anything that you identify as, you know, and but everything has its ups and downs, really, And then also the other thing I want to say is that in a lot of the northern states, there is still a lot of racism, just like the southern states, and definitely there was a very and still the world's very very politically correct. Like just because Obama became president, just because it's post 2016, there's still a lot of racism and problems. And then the next thing that I'll say is ultimately, you know what? We need to look at people as individuals and not like stereotypes. So I do want to talk about like the racism that I dealt with when I was in college. That first of all, I'm going to tell you the main story because I think that that's going to be the best one. That I had a friend and he was black and I'll call him Biggie Smalls, but like he went by the name of a rapper really, and he had a friend that was white and who said he was a KKK member. So I remember, sometimes this kid would use the word nigger a lot, and I also remember, him saying something like if he sat at the table, he'd be like, my day's bad, some nigger cut me off in traffic, like always just wanting to add the word nigger to something. And I remember, like, one day, I was going off to my job, and he was kind of saying, uh, hey, hey Biggie, why can't you be like that nigger Byron? That nigger has a couple of jobs. That nigger works very, very hard. And I actually reported that because I was very afraid that I was going to take the footrest and beat him to death with it. Like I was at the point because there was a lot of things going on the campus. There was a lot of just disrespectful people that I was afraid of my own anger. And that's not a mindset that I want to be in. And also, too, like I found out through my biological on that, there's some of that Viking ancestry that I have really. So for his own safety, I reported it because I was afraid of how violent and crazy that I would get because I just got sick and tired of just hearing that word, and definitely I've dealt with a lot of racism in college, but I reported it because I knew that I was afraid of my response, really. And one of the reasons why I didn't report that was because of two things. I meant like why I didn't report it prior was because of two things. That the first thing is because um, I'm a man, and at that time there was something called the no snitch culture. So honestly, reporting things, tattletaling, not sucking things up, was considered kind of like being a wuss or a wimp type of thing, really. And also like how I was kind of raised, really, is that you kept things to yourself. That's just how life is. But I also felt very embarrassed because there was a lot of racism and stereotyping that I dealt with when I was in college. So there was kind of a sense that I reported it. Oh well, look, there's a token black man reporting a black issue like racism, whatever, really. And I had to kind of learn, no, it's not really, harassment and offensive language. You know, that's not just a black issue. That's a everybody issue. There was a woman like for example, there was a girl who was a nude model at my college, and there was a kid that was autistic, and he would say things like, "Didn't I draw you naked in class?" and everything like that. And she reported that and say, "Hey, even though this kid has a learning disability, I don't like him talking publicly about the fact that I'm a nude model in college." That's not really her being a stereotypical woman, or that's not her. I mean, she may feel self conscious, or she may feel like, okay, I may identify as this, but I don't identify as that really. So I feel embarrassed. But you got to bring it forward. And also the other thing too is that I'm mixed race. I'm not African American. So I feel very don't allow black racism because I look black. But I felt very 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 self conscious. But he was never on the campus in general. He was not even a student, but it really, really just got to a point where, I did the right thing because I knew that, as I've learned later on in my life, just because somebody pisses you off, you don't react inappropriately. But I'm happy that I actually, spoke out about it and caused a difference. So there was many other stories, that I'll tell you guys. Another big story is that I had a college professor, Tony Whedon, and I'm going to use his name, Tony Whedon. And I remember, like, he was a very bigoted man, really. I remember, like, um, like the first day of his class, really, he'd be like, oh, black student. Or I remember, like, one day I was late, he was like, black student, black boy, because he was kind of one of those older white men that I think, in a way, was either racist or culturally insensitive. And I remember sometimes when we got assignments, he was always about, Byron, why don't you write about how you have gay parents? Why don't you write about how you were black? Like I always tell people that you can never have an African American Isaac Asimov, because, there's so many, like, teachers and professors and a lot of people that would want every African American student that they have to write about, their blackness and their black experience. And then also I'm mixed race, so obviously that's a thing that happens in a lot of these classes is, if you're in a mostly white school, or it's 99% white, you become the token black kid, like, and everybody hates Chris, so those things that happen. I know another time he was asking the class an example of give us an example of a psychological drama. I said, A Clockwork Orange. Then I said The Heart of Darkness. And then he said to the classroom, in addition to The Heart of Darkness, there was Joseph Conrad's The Nigger of the Narcissus, which is actually the name of the book, Nigger of the Narcissus, because back in the 1800s, calling black people a nigger was the politically correct term. Obviously, times have changed, really, but when he said that, the class was stunned, really, and then he kind of said, "Oh, I forgot that that's the name of a book." Oh, and they looked at me and said, "I forgot that there was a black man in class." One time he used the word niggard, Niggard, which means stingy, really, and I actually knew the definition of the word, so I explained it to the class. So niggard means stingy, but honestly, you don't use a word like that. And then the other thing about Tony was that I remember, like, one time he mentioned to the class that he was sexually abused as a kid when we were talking about the book Precious. I know another time, when we don't do our homework, he usually flips out and goes crazy and just has a violent, like, angry outburst. And then he kind of say something like, "Oh, well, then it's not your fault because, administration's lower the standards." But he kind of, like, had outbursts. I know, like, another time with Tony, I remember, like, I went to his office one day and we were talking about my writing, and he would just, like, be pounding the table, like, "Your writing better make some goddamn." He'd be like that, your writing better make some goddamn fucking sense. And I know you write like a crazy son of a bitch, really, So, again, a professor in college is banging his table, said that your writing better make some goddamn fucking sense, and other things like that, really. We can all agree, highly inappropriate, really. And he was one of those professors that, obviously he had an option, after in 2010, after, when I graduated, and his option was, either retirement or an internal investigation, which could lead to, termination, really. So he retired with his pension, but he was somebody who was not very professional. And then the last thing that he did was that there was a test that we got our second year of our freshman year. So what would happen is that if you passed this test, you would get an A+ for the class, really. And if you failed, you go to a remedial class to work on your writing, and you would actually have to take. And actually, when you took the expo analysis class that we were all taking, you don't get an A. You just had to work hard to get whatever grade he gave you. But I remember with him that he said that I passed and I did a really good job, but he intentionally failed me because he wanted me to work hard on my writing. He said, "Sometimes you write like a crazy son of a bitch, really." And, I went to a remedial writing class that was not appropriate for me. I actually had a professor who was, like, in that class saying, "Why are you here, really?" And I just told him some of that. But the point of it is that he was kind of that person that was talked about Martin Luther King, but he kind of, like, used the N-word a bunch of times. He was not an appropriate person, and definitely one of those people that, probably needed a bunch of therapy really to deal with whatever issues he had. Either it was anger or trauma responses, or being disillusioned with how things were really. So definitely that was not good. I had another professor, and what happened was that he would say things like, I remember like one time we were reading. He was talking about Huckleberry Finn for his American literature class, and he quoted Huckleberry Finn, and then he mentioned a line in Huckleberry Finn that included the word nigger, and he actually darted his eyes and he kind of was grinning at me, like he was almost like vicariously trying to call me a nigger, and a bunch of my classmates saying, well, that's kind of like what it was really. I know another time I had another professor, Tyrone Shaw, very inappropriate things. He mentioned to the class that he got STDs or the crabs really, or herpes, in the summer of '69 when he was doing a bunch of hippie protests. He was kind of mentioning that's why a lot of people did the hippie protests, because there were girls that would just be open to having sex really. So that's why a lot of people did those protests, and you're open to find the free love girls. And then the next thing about that is that he was also one of those professors, like, once again, that when I wanted to write about my childhood and talk about emotional immaturity, or sometimes when my dad would flip off the handle, or trying to make peace with a lot of the bullying and one-sided respect and other things that I dealt with my childhood, once again, he was one of those white professors that were like, write about being a proud black man, write about being happy that you have gay parents and all that, because that was kind of the token minority role really. So he did that, and I also remember him saying one time, like, I wanted to get into an MFA program. He said that I will not write you a MFA letter because you don't deserve to graduate with how you write. And then he also said on top of that most people don't deserve to graduate from college. You're one of those kids, Byron, that I'll just give you a B because you made it so far, really. Whatever classes you do with me, I'll give you a B because, we're all paying for graduation day. So he's one of those professors. And there were many professors, too, at my college that had that mentality of, if somebody's not prepared, instead of being harder on them, instead of just, like, talking to their parents or anybody else, they kind of had a mentality of, just graduating you on to the next thing, really, if you're not, like, prepared or qualified. It wasn't like they did generations ago, which is you actually failed the class, or there was actually a meeting to say, okay, you may need an extra 1 or 2 years, and I'm going to help you graduate my standard, really. Well, it wasn't that. It was just, okay, everybody's paying for graduation day, and so long, if you make it, you make it. If you don't make it, you don't make it. But obviously, that's not a good mentality, really, of pushing people forward when they're not ready. I know I had another professor. I did a controversial piece of artwork for my for a showing, really, and I was using some controversial, like, historical symbols and other things like that. So I remember one professor was like saying, would you like it if somebody hung a noose, really, and how would you feel? And I remember, like, that same professor saying, I'm going to ring you by your neck one time for something else. And I also remember another professor saying, you wouldn't like it if somebody used the word nigger in your art, and if I use the word nigger in my art, really. So it was always kind of that thing, too. Like I said, mostly white college, but a lot of people were really bold about saying the word nigger. I remember getting called a nigger by some students. One time I was interviewed by, like, the school magazine, The Basement Medicine, and I was talking about my story being mixed race, writing a graphic novel, and it's kind of almost like an allegory, like a Carl Jungian allegory to get my feelings out through some tough things that happened in my life. But there was many things in that article that I said I'm mixed race, but they put me in as a black man. They put me in as a black man who loves my gay parents when, I feel that way. I do love my parents, but, obviously I was just figuring myself out, so I probably would have not included that. But I was also kind of like looking at my writing saying, like, ooh, well, Byron's this, interesting character. Like, wow, he's such a writer. Or, wow, he's kind of mysterious. Wow, he's kind of like this and that. Like, almost kind of like putting me up as, like, this, how you do with some special needs people. Like, you put them up as this bubbly, interesting character. And everybody knows, like, it's kind of like, they propped me up as, maybe the special needs type of person. So So when that happened, I felt, very angry and hurt and mad really, because I was kind of like, you know, I was kind of like, you kind of created a narrative about me, creating a narrative as, maybe when you look at me, I'm kind of this kooky special needs person, or I'm almost like Forrest Gump, or Radio or Rain Man, where you can kind of be like, well, he's kind of entertaining as well, with how he kind of came off. But also, like I've said, I'm mixed race, but they put it in that I'm a black man. So it was always like this hammering of Byron's the black kid. And what black kids are supposed to do, which is, talk proudly about their interesting background. If they're adopted by whites, be like, I'm happy I'm adopted by whites. If my parents are gay, it's a great thing that I'm adopted by, gay guys. I did face homophobia too. Like I remember, like some people who didn't want to be my friend, or they said I don't want to be around your parents because I'm afraid that they may hit on me or whatever. Really. And that was another thing. I also remember, another time in college, as well, that I it was like some people asked me if I want to have a girlfriend. It was always that thing too about some of them saying like, oh, like I remember like taking a photography class, and there was this woman that was like had to be in her 50s, and she has a daughter, and her daughter likes black guys, so it's almost like that thing too as well. If my daughter's looking for a boyfriend, she likes she seems like somebody that you would like. That's what you say, but you don't kind of go into like the racial part of it. The other thing that I would say is that I've talked about, what happened when Barack Obama was nominated. Like during election night, people were shaking my hand and saying, like congratulations, black man, or congratulations, black president, or things like that to me. I also remember when they had the inauguration day, they were serving fried chicken, watermelon, Kool-Aid, and other like stereotypical stuff. I remember like for my black literature class, African American literature, they were serving grape soda. Some people were bringing in grape soda and Kool-Aid and other things like that. There are people who made like soul food and other dishes. I also remember too, like I know I promised to lay off, but I'll mention this about my dad, that when I took the African American literature class, my dad was a little upset that the teacher wasn't a black woman. Saying it'd be better if a black woman taught that class, really, because they're more connected to the history. I can understand that, but it's still kind of an ignorant thing to say, really. The other thing about that is I remember, like, once again, my parents being like happy that I'm taking like a black literature class, because the stereotype that that's what black people are supposed to do. Like honestly, if I was Jewish, I should be taking a bank accounting class, some accounting classes, some jewelry classes, some like Woody Allen studies classes, or Stanley Kubrick movie studies, because that whole entire black people are supposed to take African American literature classes. There was a history of the blues classes. Obviously, if I was taking that, my parents would be very proud of me, because like, yeah, that's what those blacks are supposed to do. That's what black people are supposed to do. It's kind of bad, really. I always tell myself that I'm happy that they didn't have a African American literature class in high school, because my dad would probably mandate that I take that because of his belief that I'm mixed race. But again, I'm mixed raced, but he considers me a black man. He more likely he would do that, really. If I was if they had like African American literature or African American history or blues or whatever classes, like definitely he would sign me up like that, no problem, really. My brother's into cooking, so if there was a class on soul food or fried chicken and watermelon, he would sign my brother up. He would sign my older brother up for that. But if I was Jewish, more than likely he would sign me up for accounting classes or history of the Holocaust classes. Like I may be joking a little bit, but that's true. I did kind of grow up with that. Like black people are supposed to take black classes like African American literature and other things like that. But I also remember like my senior project where I did do a piece of writing, and Tyrone Shaw, my professor, like he was really trying to like push me to write about something really happy, nothing about like hurt or trauma or pain or whatever. And I remember like feeling really, really upset with the writing that I produced, really. And it was kind of almost like, in that writing, I was talking about like how I was a little like, self-hating about being African American. I remember like some people chuckling and seeing like, okay, well, this is a cute thing to write, like this is how we look at you. You know what? You're just a socially awkward kid that comes from white parents, and your grandmother loves you, things like that. I remember like taking my writing and then just like crumbling it up and throwing it in the trash when I was done, really, because that was kind of who I really was in college. I was the black kid. I was also the socially awkward nerd diversion kid, or I was like the kid that was really really naive. So when people disrespected me or insulted me, even professors or other people like that, or said some racist things, people would just be like, okay, I can talk to Byron however I want to talk to him, even if it's like racism or disrespect towards him, really. So yeah, I remember like throwing away my writing. I remember like I worked very very hard in college. Like I remember like one year I did 24 college credits. I worked 5 or 6 jobs. I worked like during the summer. I remember like working close to 20-hour days. And I remember, when I graduated, I did receive a scholarship to the Vermont Studio Center. I received 2 BFAs, and the college was cheap enough to be like, okay, nobody gets 2 degrees, you get 1 degree. So pick and choose your BFA in creative writing or your BFA in studio arts. They're not willing to even give me 2 pieces of paper for getting 2 BFA degrees. They're being cheap bastards like they were. And I remember graduation day, everybody got like their diploma, and then the diploma was no like in those green envelopes. They didn't give you any paperwork. They didn't give you your diploma. It got a note saying, thanks for graduating, but we're gonna send your diploma in the mail once you pay everything at the business office. Everybody got that whether you paid or not, but that's almost like a big fuck you. You're opening your envelope, your diploma, and you see a big notice saying, it's not there, please pay your bill, really. That's kind of like a big fuck you. I remember, despite all the great things I did for the art department, despite all like the stuff that I did, and I've told the story about what happened to me, that I made a bunch of artwork for my senior exhibition. I got a really great reception. I got a lot of people talking that I could be like, down in New York, and there was a lot of like people that were like really praising me. And there was actually talk of hanging my artwork, in public areas, like these big, large pieces of plywood, like these 6 by 24 like pieces of like abstract paintings. So what happened was they actually took my all my artwork, and they actually told me that they actually cut all my artwork into like a bunch of wood and tiles, and they used it as floorboards for a clubhouse. At least it didn't go to a good use. So, a person that I made over 1,000 pieces of art. I've taken all the art history classes. I've given a lot of like, public presentations of my art and art history. I had a lot of promise. I've actually met really good artists at the Vermont Studio Center. I received like a fellowship to there, and I was really put over in a big way at college. There was a future for me if I was an MFA student and other things like that. And, with all that said, really, they took my artwork and they actually cut it up into floorboard pieces, and they used it for floorboards of a clubhouse. How disrespectful and how much of a slap to the face and how much of a big fuck you was that, really. That's one of the most lowest things that you can do, really. So it was all that, really. I remember another story was that, there was a debt collector that was a fraudulent debt collector when I graduated college that they sold my debt to, and he was threatening to put a gun to my head over the phone. And there was also some other issues that are a bit outside of racism. But, my college was really just, a bad college. I hated that college, There was talk about them getting a bunch of bulldozers and destroying the college, making a big public park because they're not doing well financially. I would love to see, my college destroyed and everything like that. There's a lot of people even leave, Vermont Studio Center in my college as well, really. But I definitely would say that my college had a huge history of racism. And, just like that thing too, oh, well, if you're special needs, you're socially awkward, neurodivergent, or naive, I can treat you like a nigger, I can treat you like whatever, really, because I think that I can get away with it. And there's also, I went to school between 2006 and 2010. So it was a time where a lot of people just that was before the PC culture. This was probably the Chappelle Show culture, where Dave Chappelle used the word nigger a lot in his television specials, and also on on his television specials on the Chappelle Show. So a lot of people were accustomed to saying the word nigger and whatever, really, or even like, if you had black friends and somebody was white, they don't care if you say nigga or nigger or whatever, really. But it was not. It was a really really messed up thing, really. So. I also remember, like, one final thing I'll say in this video. There's going to be a part two. Is that I remember, like, one time posting online talking about some of my experiences, and then there was like an ex professor saying, "Oh, well, you know what? This is the young generation, and they're saying things, and it's like all about me and whatever. Byron, you received an excellent education. I'm rooting for you. Get out there and take on the world. I'm rooting for you." And I kind of responded back. He never got back to me. I'm saying, like, it's like that conundrum that I've had for a very long time in my life. You get called the nigger, you get disrespected many, many times. You're supposed to let that go. You're supposed to, start a family and be another generation of, what, that's what life is. Things don't work out. You're disrespected. You need to just have a family. You need to work very, very hard and pass the same shit like that I was taught. College is everything. Having a family is what you do, really. And ultimately, in life, you don't always accomplish your dreams, but you kind of stick to what you stick to, really. No. I've learned, two things in life that are very important, which is that, number one, you got to move on, but sometimes you got to move on and move forward while creating some consequence, while doing some advocacy. And I think that this is a good video because, while I'm learning how to use my camera, while I'm learning how to use my drone, while I want to do travel videos, while I want to do other projects, I have no problem just digging up this old history because it's hurt me, it's angered me for many, many times. This has been something I've wanted to talk to about for like almost 20 years since I graduated in 2010, really. But the point of it is that there was a huge issue of racism. It was very unapologetic. I remember actually talking to one of the presidents of the college, and they said, "I'll get back to you, and we'll talk a little bit further. We'll talk about solutions on how to move forward from this." This person never responded to me. And then the other part of it is that, honestly, there wasn't a lot of education at that time about racism. They could have done assemblies about what is harassment, what to report. Sexual harassment, racial harassment, discrimination, religious discrimination, other things like that, and really kind of do some advocacy. That's what I talked about, because there's plenty of colleges that now have posters and whatever to say, okay, this is what it is, and report it, because there's a lot of people at that time, including me, who didn't know a lot about what sexual harassment, racial harassment was in 2006, 2007, really. And I've worked at many colleges where people don't know that. That's why there needs to be more education. But they never felt that way to listen to what I said, really. It was just almost like, what, you're a former student, fuck you, and please pay your student loans, or once you make it like a former graduate, Farrah Fawcett, if I'm right, give us a donation, really, So it wasn't that good, and I need to do a follow-up video of other things that happened at that college that was really, really fucked up. I remember, working in the school cafeteria, and we were, all serving food and cooking food for an outdoor event. I remember, the president of the college getting on a microphone, and she said something like, what, if you give us donations, we won't be having crappy cafeteria food. And, there are plenty of people who worked the cafeteria who called her a cunt and whatever. She publicly apologized, but that's kind of messed up. You have even a president of your college insulting the cafeteria food when everybody's breaking their backs in the hot sun when they're working out of a trailer because they're doing renovations and everybody's hot and sweating, and some people have to work all night, really. And she insults the cafeteria food, but also people respond back by calling her a cunt when, obviously that's one of the worst things you can call a woman. That's actually sexual harassment automatically, really. But that was that was really, really messed up. But I'm proud of myself because there's a lot of times we're taught to look back at college and be like, those college years. College. But it was never a good experience for me. It's something that created a lot of hate and anger and sadness and frustration and just, you were a flavor of the month, really, and they only really cared about my education once I become a master's student. So a lot of things to talk about in a follow-up video, but it did have an issue with racism, and I was the black student. You know, nigger of the Narcissus. I was the nigger of Johnson State College. I was the nigger of Northern Vermont.